On yesterday's episode of Locked On Syracuse, I said I was done talking about conference realignment until I felt like Syracuse and the ACC would truly be impacted by what is happening in the national collegiate landscape. Well, here we are one day later, and it's happening. The ACC in talks to bring in two former Pac 12 programs. We'll break it down. I'll give you my thoughts, and I'll tell you, where does SU fall, or did the ACC put Syracuse in a position to be on the outside looking in when conference realignment comes to a close? It's your Locked On Syracuse Tuesday episode. Let's get right after it.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome into your Locked On Syracuse Tuesday episode. I'm Owen Valentine saying thank you so much for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today and every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today, our episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/locked on college. Terms and conditions apply. Owen Valentine, Locked On Syracuse Tuesday. And today it's a little bit more of a Locked On ACC type episode. Our friends at Locked On ACC, I'm sure will have a lot to talk about this. They spoke about it a little bit yesterday on their Monday episode, and I am sure they will be continuing this conversation today because it is the biggest thing happening in the ACC right now, and it is arguably and probably is the biggest thing happening across the country in terms of collegiate athletics is conference realignment, is the regrouping of the college athletics landscape at this point in time. I want to start today's episode putting my hand up and saying this is by no means the strong suit of my knowledge. Conferences, conference realignment, the impacts of things like this. This is not my specialty. This is not something that I feel like I have a ton of stuff to necessarily offer in terms of new info, in terms of anything all too groundbreaking. What I can offer are my thoughts as a fan of college athletics, as a longtime fan, a lifelong Central New Yorker, and the impacts that I feel like this could have on Syracuse. And that's what we're going to focus on today. I want to look at the ACC. I want to look at what is happening in terms of conference realignment, and I want to break it down and share my thoughts. And I think that will bring us a nice episode. If you want to join the conversation, please, by all means, at @LO_Syracuse over on Twitter, or if you're watching this on YouTube, by all means, throw it in the YouTube comments, your thoughts on the situation, how you feel like this impacts Syracuse, what Syracuse might need to do, and just sort of conference realignment as a whole. I spoke about this a little bit yesterday, and I'll preface with that once again today. So for our everydayers, this will be a little bit of a refresher for those of you that maybe missed yesterday. This will recap my thoughts. Conference realignment makes a ton of sense in the football world. And in college athletics, football is king. We know that. Football is where your revenue comes from. Football is what funds the rest of an athletic department for the most part. Basketball contributes, some other stuff contributes, but football is what allows an athletic department to stay afloat for the most part. That's where the primary money comes in. That's where your biggest TV deals are. That's where your biggest ad revenue, sponsorships, all of that, it's coming from football. I understand that. I get that. But the decisions being made surrounding football right now are going to have tremendous impacts on your non-football, and I will say non-basketball student athletes. The impact of increased traveling cross country to play conference games now, where you're going to play a weeknight game at 7, game ends at 9. You're not getting a chartered flight home. You're spending the night in a hotel. You're waking up early, you're going to the airport, you're getting home at 11 a.m., and now you're supposed to go to class as a student athlete. I don't like that. And I think there are a ton of negative implications on your non-football and basketball student athletes. I get making decisions because you need to stay afloat money-wise. You need to stay competitive recruiting-wise. If you're going to bring in the biggest of recruits in football and basketball, you have to offer the best competition, playing in the best leagues, playing in the best conferences, playing against teams and opponents that professional scouts, your NFL scouts, your NBA scouts, your WNBA scouts, whatever, they are going to look at you playing against the upper echelon of opponents, right? That was one of the criticisms of Trey Lance in the NFL a couple of years back. And what's going on there, right? Who's he playing? Where's the competition? Can he play at the next level if he's not playing against top tier opponents? Will he have a comeback season? Who knows? But you want to be able to advertise that. I get that. But let's make sure that we are also keeping in mind the other 95% of sports. The other, I mean, football is 100 guys basically. So that's probably 5 more teams than normal. The other 80, 85% of your athletic department, right? Let's not make decisions without keeping the best interest for those student athletes in mind. Because if you're the NCAA, right, you are an operation that is talking about and continues to talk about preserving amateur status, things of that nature, and making sure that your student athletes are students first and athletes second. Whether that's what's actually true or not, I'm not here to talk about, but that is what you are in theory preserving. This past weekend, the past week, the Pac-12 decimated. It disintegrated and it broke apart. We talked about this yesterday. Colorado, Arizona State, Arizona, Utah to the Big 12, Washington, Oregon to the Big 10. Now, Oregon and Washington, in my opinion, and many others, are the two that you're most sought after in the Pac-12, or what was once formerly the Pac-12. You miss out on those. They go to the Big 10. Those are your two biggest. That's where you've got some ties in terms of competition. I like that. In terms of branding, I like that. Oregon, in terms of branding, is gigantic. I get that. I get those moves. I understand it. They go to the Big 10. And it seems like, and obviously I'm sure there was stuff happening behind the scenes. I believe it was a Bleacher Report saying that the ACC was in attempts to try and bring 5 to 7 of those Pac-12 teams into the ACC before the Big 10 news and the Big 10 merger with maybe Washington and Oregon. They were trying to. I don't know how much of that is correct. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. But I do know that right now, it seems like the ACC is behind the 8 ball, or was at least behind the 8 ball. And in the ACC, your most recent huge story is Florida State working on a way to get out of the grant of rights that is, in theory, maintaining the status of the ACC and making it really, really, really difficult for you to exit the conference prior to 2036 when the grant of rights expires. The buyout option, and this is saying that you can find a way out to begin with, but the buyout is $120 million. That is 3 years of revenue in the ACC. The revenue share at this point in time in the ACC is about $40 million. So if you are to buy out of that, that's 3 years of your revenue gone. Operating at a loss, whatever you want to do. Are you finding donors to pay that off? I'm sure they will offset those costs for sure. It's not completely out of university pocket, but that is something that will happen. So if you're the ACC, and what we're seeing is, in theory, the formation of two sort of super conferences, the AFC, the NFC, the Big 10, the SEC, whatever you want to call it, that is where things seem to go. The Big 10 and the SEC, in terms of revenue share, are offering the most money. I believe the SEC is paying, don't quote me on this, I believe these numbers are correct, about $10 million more per year in revenue share, and the Big 10 is pushing closer to $20 million more per year in terms of the TV ad or the TV revenue contracts and those shares. I believe those numbers are correct. I am positive that both of those conferences are paying significantly more than the ACC is. The ACC pays more than the Big 12 by a decent amount, but that is where things fall right now. And you have the likes of Florida State trying to make their way out of the ACC and into the Big 10, which I think is where they would like to go money-wise because they are paying the most, or the SEC, which fits a little bit more regionally in terms of location. Where do you fall in that? I don't know, but that's what you seem. If Florida State finds a way out, dominoes fall, and Syracuse takes a massive, massive hit moving forward. And we'll break that down after we talk a little bit more about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions. They make it easy to focus on the candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's like the recruiting process, right? You're going out there, you're watching players play, you're interacting with them and their families, and you're trying to figure out, is this person the right fit for our team? It's the same thing in football. It's the same thing in basketball. It's the same thing in any sport. And it's the same thing with your small business. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. It's LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the best qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Owen Valentine here on your Locked On Syracuse Tuesday episode, talking conference realignment, recapping what it is that's going on in the ACC and where I think Syracuse falls in this whole ordeal and what this means for Syracuse athletics as a whole. We're talking about how Florida State is working on a way or wants to find a way. And I believe the most recent quote from McCullough is that it's not if Florida State leaves, but it's how and when Florida State leaves. And what dominoes fall? If Florida State finds a way out, does Clemson go? If Florida State finds a way out, does North Carolina go? If Florida State finds a way out, does a Miami go? Right? What dominoes fall if Florida State makes its way out of the ACC? That's an impossible question to necessarily answer at this point in time. And it's why, if you are the Atlantic Coast Conference, if you are a team like Syracuse, where you're not necessarily one of those teams that will easily get picked up by the SEC or the Big Ten, you need to be working every ounce of your being towards maintaining the integrity and maintaining the ACC as is right now in terms of the upper echelon of this conference, in terms of branding, in terms of money, in terms of viewership, in terms of fan base, in terms of all of that, national relevance. You need to keep those teams in the conference because the ACC will look similarly to the Pac-12 if you cannot do that. Maybe a little bit better than the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 is not going to exist for what we know at this point in time. I think the ACC could stay alive, but it is barely breathing, I believe, to quote the Fray, but I could be wrong on that quote there. Still alive, but I'm barely breathing. That would be the ACC if Florida State exits and 2 or 3 of the upper echelon programs depart subsequently. You need to do everything in your power to keep them in the conference. And I will say this as ACC athletic directors and other executives meet or have some calls talking about the likes of Cal and Stanford. Is that doing enough to keep Florida State satisfied, to bump the revenue enough to keep the ACC, even at a little bit of a loss compared to the Big Ten and the SEC, the better option because you will not have to pay that $120 million buyout? The answer is no. Right? I believe the number I saw was it's about 13 million additional TV households by expanding to Cal and Stanford. These are not mega brands. I mean, Stanford, in terms of your non-rev sports, in terms of your Olympic sports, is a powerhouse, finding ways to compete in, seems like, every sport, and that is because Stanford offers literally every sport imaginable in the college athletics landscape. But in football, Is Cal and Stanford enough to offset what you're talking about in terms of revenue difference between conferences and the ACC? No. Are they big enough teams to make it worth the fact that your softball team or your field hockey team now has to, if you're Syracuse, travel 2,000 plus miles to the West Coast for a weeknight tilt against Cal or Stanford? No. It's a reactive move. This is not a proactive move. This is a last ditch effort to try and maintain relevancy. And it doesn't do enough. A proactive move, if you are going to do this thing where you're bringing in West Coast teams and you are expanding, I believe Cal and Oregon or in Stanford are almost 2,000 miles further west than Louisville, who is the furthest west team currently in the Atlantic Coast Conference. 2,000 miles you are expanding this conference. That is about the extent of the continental United States. That is what you're doing at this point in time for Cal and Stanford. For it to make sense, you need the brands. You need Oregon. You could use a Washington. Syracuse would love Washington as Mike Hopkins still over there and having that relationship. That would be fun to be able to play that conference game. For the rest of the ACC, how big a deal is Washington? More relevant than Cal and Stanford, maybe. But I don't see Cal and Stanford, and maybe some people do, but I think in general, if you're a Florida State, if you're a Clemson, if you are a North Carolina, a Miami, teams that are big enough to be warranted and are succeeding enough in the baseball, or not the baseball, in the football and basketball worlds, does adding Cal and Stanford to the ACC impact your decision at all? I don't think so. I don't think it changes the trajectory of the ACC in any capacity. I think the ACC with Cal and Stanford, and someone tweeted it out, Cal and Stanford seem like ACC fits. Yeah, because they are ACC fits. But what does that mean for Florida State? Nothing, right? These are not people moving the ball. These are not people changing your opinion if you're one of those teams on the brink of departure or looking for a way out. Dabo Sweeney talked about it in an interview the other day, talking about how we're on the brink of a theoretical 40 or 50 team mega conference. And this is where my conversation starts, and we hone things in to the 315. We hone things into Syracuse. When you look at your Power 5 conferences, your Power 4 at this point in time, where does Syracuse fall if you're putting in the best 40 teams into a program or into a mega conference? Because right now, you look at things and you talk about where things are, and where you talked about it at the start of this episode, these decisions are made through the lens of football. I will say that, right? We know that. We are aware of that. Syracuse right now, this is an old episode or an old ranking, but when you look at these teams, Syracuse in terms of football is towards the bottom of the ACC. It's towards the bottom of Power 5. They brought in the worst recruiting class in Power 5 football this season. When you look at basketball at this point in time, Syracuse is middle of the pack. And I will say this, the next 2 seasons with regards to Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball are paramount towards the future of Syracuse athletics. Syracuse needs to show the rest of the country, the rest of the NCAA, that Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball are brands that mean what they once did. And the biggest thing going for Syracuse in both of these sports is history right now. Syracuse more recently in the basketball side, being a perennial powerhouse, being your blue bloods for a period of time in terms of college basketball. A little bit longer in the past with the regards to college football. I mean, we were talking on Twitter, Syracuse is tied with Alabama at 7th in college football for most Hall of Fame NFL talent. 7th. Tied with Alabama, that is the history of Syracuse football, right? Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball, they have the history going for them. But they need to show right now that right? You don't make money off of the history. It helps. It can help your branding. It can help your fan base. It can help the recognition. But we talk about this with recruits. Syracuse has lost that name brand. They've lost that, ooh, Syracuse, that, ooh, I know this. I want to go there. I want to visit this. I don't even have to visit this because I see them so much, because I know so much about them. Syracuse has lost that in the last decade, maybe a little bit more. They need to reestablish themselves in the next few seasons on the brink of what is going to be the biggest shift in college athletics easily in my lifetime. I don't know since when, in all honesty. This is the meteor attack on the dinosaurs. This is that impact in terms of how drastically the world will be different if the world is college athletics. That is what the next few years are about to be. And Syracuse needs to say, hey, we're here. We can make money. We are a powerhouse. And maybe that's going to be seen more in the likes of basketball. But you need to demonstrate that in basketball. Football needs to be a bowl eligible team, winning record 7-5 regular season type deal for the next 2 seasons, maybe better. If you can get an 8-4 year, that's asking for a ton. I'm just saying, in terms of what makes you mean something, you got to win some football games against non-scrubs, against not Colgate, against not Western Michigan, against not even Army or Purdue. You got to win football games in that 3-game stretch this season where you play. We talked about it on Twitter yesterday at @LO_Syracuse over there. The number 9 team in the preseason coaches poll, the number 20 team in the preseason coaches poll, and the number 8 team in the preseason coaches poll. That's Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State, respectively. You got to win those types of games to say, hey, look at us. Look at us. You can do some things. Basketball, there are very few teams that are good enough at basketball and relevant enough nationally at basketball to offset where Syracuse is in football at this point in time. You look at the likes of Duke, even Kentucky's better football-wise, but branding, right? There are very few teams at Kansas, right? How many teams in college basketball are that important that they can offset the middle of the pack to bottom of the pack that is the last decade minus a couple of seasons of Syracuse football? And where does Syracuse go from there? Best case scenario is that the ACC stays alive, right? I think for football, the ACC is where you want to be for Syracuse as is. I don't see better options. I mean, the Big Ten, sure. But does the Big Ten want Syracuse right now? Probably not. If we're talking football and revenue in that regard. Would the Big Ten be cool basketball-wise to play some of those games? Yeah, I'd like that. I think that'd be really fun. But right now, Syracuse basketball doesn't necessarily mean enough to warrant the offsetting of football. So Syracuse, can they be in the Big Ten? Maybe. I don't think Syracuse is an SEC option. I don't think they like the likes of Syracuse at all. Do they want to go back to a dilapidated Big East? Not really, right? What is the Big East at this point? If it was an OG Big East, yeah, that'd be cool. But the upper echelon of the Big East is on to bigger and better things and is not going to want to necessarily return to that, right? That's not something they're going to want to return to. And that's where you're stuck. So if you're Syracuse, where do things fall? What are your options? And I think your options have to rely on what you can do in the next 2 to 3 years to establish yourself as being nationally relevant, being a big deal. That is an NCAA tournament run in basketball. That is a bowl game win in football. That is being a bowl eligible team for 3 or 4 straight seasons to show that, yeah, maybe we're not a national championship contender. Maybe we're not a team that's going to go out and win the ACC, or a team that's going to do enough year in and year out to get above that 500 threshold and play in a bowl game. But what we can do in the basketball court is also a big deal. And we can be a national championship contender in basketball. That's what you need to reestablish in the next 3 seasons. Can it happen? Yes. Will it happen? That's why we play the game. Right now, your goal, if you're John Wildeck, your goal, if you are in the ACC, the middle to bottom portion of the ACC, your goal is to maintain the integrity of this conference and keep everybody in. Because the second the first domino falls, the ACC will look eerily similar to the Pac-12. And that's where I leave it today. There are big things happening in the college athletics landscape. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Let me know your thoughts on Twitter at @LO_Syracuse. Did I get something wrong today? Did I completely look over something? Did I miss something? Are you telling me that Cal and Stanford are actually a big enough deal if you are in the upper portion, money-wise, brand-wise of the ACC to want to stay? Let me know. Start a conversation. I'll be in the comments today, replying to some people, liking some people. If I like what they're saying, things like that. Let's get the chat going. Let's get a conversation started, and let's sort of see where we fall. What is the best option for Syracuse? I saw some things. If they break off regionally, maybe the Big 10 and the SEC make a super conference or something, and the rest of the Power 5 sort of does like an NFL. Almost you've got divisions and conferences and things like that, and Syracuse could be a part of that. Yeah, that'd be cool. But I want decisions that keep Syracuse afloat. They need to happen, because if Syracuse is on the outside looking in, it's not good for what's next. It really isn't. And it would be a dire situation for Syracuse and many other teams in their boat. Maybe in the lower tier of Power 5 in terms of football and basketball as things stand right now. Maybe a little bit below or a little bit above the lower tier. Where do things fall? There are some chats that are going to happen. There are some tough conversations that are going to happen. And Syracuse, what you can do if you are a player, if you are a coach, not necessarily John Wildeck at this point in time, what you can do is win. And that is what you have in your hands. If you're an athlete, if you are on a team, things like that, you got to go out and win. If you're John Wildeck, former ESPN guru, do something. Make the league some money. Bring in some more TV money. Keep this conference together, John. Do something. Please, for the sake of your athletic department, for the sake of Syracuse athletics, use your connections and pull something off. Because if you can't do that, John, with all due respect, why are you here? Why are you here? And maybe I'm wrong for saying that. I don't know. But I look at the connections and I look at where things stand, and I see a man with a lot of connections and a man that was brought in because of those connections to be the athletic director at Syracuse in a situation where the league is on the brink of collapse. Not yet, but could be very soon. They're on the outside looking in of 2 powerhouse conferences. They need you. This is your chance to step up. This is the chance to say, hey, I can do this. This is me. And I want to see it happen. I would love to see John Wildeck find a way to pull this off. And that's where we leave things today. Owen Valentine, you're Locked On Syracuse Tuesday. I am sure now this will not be the last time we talk about this, but this will be where we leave things today. Locked On ACC, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about if you want to check them out. Thanks for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today and every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if you want to get notified every day, please, please, please subscribe. It goes a long way. It helps us. Pushing 1,500 subs over on YouTube. Join us wherever you get your podcasts. Means the world to me. whenever I see interactions, whenever I see new subscriptions. But that will do it. Be kind today. Make somebody smile. Have a great Tuesday, and I will catch you tomorrow on Locked On Syracuse. So, boy, OV. Peace.